Another day dawns in the Savannah County Courthouse, or so it seems. Just another case, another defendant, another judge perched high, thinking he's got it all figured out before a word is even spoken. But hold on, this isn't just any trial. The man stepping into that courtroom? He's no ordinary soul. Walter Harris, 78 years old, carries more than the wrinkles etched deep in his face. Oh no, he carries a truth so powerful it could rattle the very system trying to silence him. Can you feel the weight of that? What unfolds isn't just a legal spat, it's a reckoning, a heart-pounding clash of pride versus patience, arrogance versus history. By the time it's over, someone's walking out changed, but let me tell you, it won't be Walter. You won't believe what happens when power meets its match. Are you ready? There's a heavy silence in old courthouses, isn't there? Not peaceful, but oppressive, like the air's thick with broken promises. Savannah County Courthouse is no different. As morning light spills through tall windows, the wooden pews creak under folks waiting for justice, or something close. Can you sense the tension? Then in walks Walter Harris. At 78, his steps are slow but deliberate, each one a testament to a life of struggle. His slightly curved spine doesn't scream weakness, oh no. It speaks of battles fought, burdens carried in silence. In a faded brown flannel shirt, buttoned to the top, his worn slacks and cracked leather boots stand tall, just like him. He removes his hat as he enters, a nod to respect, but respect back? Ha! Wrong room for that. Whispers hiss instantly, another squatter. Probably homeless. Why waste time? They don't bother to whisper softly. Walter's heard it all on sidewalks, from guards in neighborhoods that shun him, from cops who cuff first, ask later. But does he flinch? Never. He stands, eyes steady, chin up, dignity shouting without a word. Isn't that strength incredible? Behind the bench looms Judge Gregory Hale, 59, broad-shouldered, his black robe like armor. He doesn't wield justice but judgment, his voice a blade, his stare cutting deep. He's jailed more folks than anyone can recall, sneering at repeat offenders, wastes, or those people. To him, Walter's guilty already, just a matter of how hard the hammer falls. Can you believe that arrogance? Next case. Hale barks, barely glancing at the file. The bailiff clears his throat. Case 771B. State versus Walter Harris. Unlawful occupation of condemned property. Walter steps forward, alone at the defense table, no lawyer, no advocate, just a man against a rigged system. Can you imagine that courage? Hale looks up, smirking. Does he see a war veteran, an architect who designed hospitals? Nope. He sees a tired old black man, someone to dismiss. Well, he drawls, leaning back, you again. He flips the folder slowly, a performance, his mind's made up. Found living in a condemned home on River's End Drive, he sneers. Let me guess, memories? Nostalgia. Walter stays silent. You people always have a story, Hale scoffs, waving the file. But nostalgia isn't ownership, Mr. Harris. Walter's silence unnerves some, others smirk. But he stands, shoulders relaxed, hands folded, not begging, just waiting. Isn't that powerful? I'll ask again, Hale snaps, annoyed. Were you on that property? Walter nods. Yes, sir. Doing what? Walter pauses, choosing words carefully. Sitting on the porch, he says simply. That's it. Pure truth. Can you hear its weight? Hale scoffs. A porch marked for demolition. You know the city owns that land, right? Walter nods, voice steady. I know what they say, Your Honor, but that house used to be mine. The room shifts, a flicker of awareness, tension when a man refuses to break. Can you feel it? Hale's smirk fades slightly. Used to be, but not anymore. Why keep showing up? Walter breathes softly, then locks eyes with the judge. Because when I sit there, it's the only time the world feels right. Oh, those words. Like describing a sunrise, not defending a crime. For a moment, Hale's face softens, like he almost gets it, but it passes. Feelings don't make it legal, Mr. Harris. The world doesn't run on sentimentality. Walter stands, silent, proud. Isn't that resolve breathtaking? Hale's irritated. No plea, no fight? Walter's battled worse than this judge could dream. And Hale's about to learn who he is. But not yet. One phone call's coming. Can you sense the storm? The courtroom's cold, not in temperature, but in its silence, the way folks eye Walter like he's done for. Alone at the defense table, hands folded, no lawyer, no support, just an old man in a room that's judged him guilty. Can you feel that isolation? Hale adjusts his robe, leaning forward with unchallenged authority, acting like justice is his to sign. The assistant DA stands, young, polished, blonde hair in a tight bun, navy suit crisp, holding a folder like it's just another case. Your Honor, she begins, Case 771B, State v. Walter Harris, 78, charged with unlawful entry and occupation of 415 Rivers End Drive. She reads flatly, Mr. Harris was found on the porch, refused to leave. No altercation, but he was cited before for a similar incident. She sets the file down. The state seeks resolution. Can you believe how routine it sounds? Hale ignores her, eyes on Walter. You hear that? Told once, and here you are. Walter doesn't flinch, just stands, breathing, waiting. Hale leans closer. What makes you think the law doesn't apply to you? Walter's voice is soft, honest. I didn't think that, Your Honor. I just didn't want to forget. Forget what? Hale scoffs. A house? A porch swing? That's your pass. Walter's silent. He's said enough. His stillness rattles Hale, who craves yells, tears, not this calm. Can you sense his unease? This courtroom doesn't run on nostalgia. Hale snaps. It runs on law, property rights. You have no claim, no ownership, no lease. Walter nods. That's correct. So why go back? Walter's reply is a whisper, because it was mine before they said it wasn't. Oh, that lands hard. The room stirs, unsure if this is a trial or something human. Hale slams the file shut. I think you want pity, Mr. Harris. You're no victim, you chose this. Walter's unbothered, he's faced worse. Hale's smile drips condescension. I see you're kind all the time, thinking the world owes you. But the law sees facts, you broke it. Can you feel the venom? Walter breathes. I didn't break anything. I just sat down. Bam. That truth stings. Hale waves it off. To remember, to prove a point, whatever. You're 78, Mr. Harris. Stop dreaming, start being a burden. The gallery gasps. Someone mutters, enough. But Walter? He doesn't blink, eyes steady, dignity unshaken. Isn't that awe-inspiring? The judge pushes. You want us to feel sorry? There's nothing noble in breaking into a condemned house. Walter replies, I didn't break in. Hale smirks. You strolled in like it was yours. Walter nods. Exactly. Can you believe that calm? Hale rolls his eyes. Got a lawyer? No, sir. Tried to hire one. No money. Of course, Hale mutters. The DA tries. Given his age, nonviolent offense, we suggest a fine or community service. Hale glares. That's justice. It's the code, she says. Hale taps the table. Everyone wants to go easy because he's old, looks harmless. Men like him don't learn from slaps. Then no mercy, 30 days in jail. Can you fathom the shock? Gasps erupt, the DA stunned, the bailiff flinches. Walter? Unmoved, like he knew. But it's not over. Can you feel it? Silence isn't surrender, is it? Walter stands, no counsel, no family, just a man reduced to a case number. Hale glares, performing, not seeking truth. Not saying much, Mr. Harris, he taunts. Walter's steady, what would matter to you? The gallery shifts, that's no defiance, just fact. Hale smirks, playing the martyr. No, sir. Tired of speaking where no one listens. Hale laughs, smug, philosophers when caught. I deal in facts. Walter's silence carries decades of slights, sacrifices. Can you feel its weight? Hale leans in. People like you think rules don't apply. You broke the law. I don't care about your porch. Walter's still, eyes forward, unbroken. Hale squints. Why no responsibility? Always a sob story. Walter tilts his head. Why hear emotion when you should hear history? Oh, that cuts. Hale snaps, "Your history's not on trial." "No," Walter says, "it never is. This isn't about trespassing, everyone knows it. Walter's on trial for existing with dignity. Can you see the truth?" Hale's colder, "You were cited before, same behavior. You show up where you don't belong." Walter's clear, "I've been told I don't belong my whole life, in schools, neighborhoods, offices I built." Hale's unmoved, "No pass for a hard life." Walter nods, "I know how it works. I'm not surprised." The room shifts, whispers stop, respect flickers. Hale pushes, "Tired of playing victim?"
Walter S. silence roar. No défense, no counsel. Aiglar.
"Not even trying." Walter meets his eyes, "I tried all my life. This isn't the first court to get it wrong." Can you feel that sting?
The air est thick, like a fuse burning down.
Walter's calm is louder than any protest. Hale wants submission, but Walter gives none. The DA tries, "Given his age, clean record, we recommend, no."
I cutter off.
Men like him don't learn from fines. He leans forward, "I've seen your kind, quiet words, thinking you're above it." Walter's unmoved, "This isn't justice, it's control."
You ignored the law.
Hale roars. 30 days.
The room réel, gasp, murmure.
Walter stands calm, like he's ready.
Can you sense the turpentine?
Hale's smug, but Walter's nod unsettles him. "Understand your sentence?"
Yes, Your Honor. Anything to say?
"No, sir." Adjourned. The gavel slams, but Walter's composure haunts. The DA looks down, the bailiff hesitates. Walter's unbroken, jail won't destroy him. He's faced worse.
I feel it, something is off.
He hasn't won. This isn't over.
Can you feel the storm? Walter est too calm, holding a hurricane.
The gavel echoes, but Walter stands tall, verdict sliding off him. Whispers of disbelief ripple, no jail for a 78-year-old who sat on a porch.
I snaps, it's over.
Take him.
Walter speak, mais il make a call. Not appléa, juste calme. A call. I chucle.
Too late for lawyers.
One call, sir. Fin, 60 secondes.
The bailiff hands over his phone.
Walter dial from memory, no hésitation. The room stills. Ring, ring, click.
For words, it's time. Bring them.
Can you feel the power? No explanation, juste calme certainty.
He returns the phone, stands tall, waiting.
I mock, grand kid protesting. Walter is silent. The call sa signal.
Enough drama, take him.
But a huge false, like something is coming. Walter S. eyes meet eyes. No fear, juste knowing.
This isn't the end.
Can you sense it?
It starts with heels clicking on marble, sharp, purposeful. The doors burst open, and she walks in, Jacqueline Harris, Walter's daughter, congresswoman, attorney, a force. Her black suit screams power, heels striking like thunder. 3 men follow, briefcases from Warren and Grant LLP.
The room tremble.
Can you see the shift? Hale barks, "This is adjourned." Jacqueline strides to Walter, hand on his shoulder, solidarity. She faces Hale, eyes razor-sharp, "Your Honor, review these documents." Hale's irritated, case is ruled. She hands over a thick folder, placing it with precision. "Open it." Hale hesitates, then opens it. His face changes, brow furrowed, grip tight. The papers reveal Walter, veteran, architect, homeowner. The house? Still his, never condemned, tied in disputes.
Can you imagine Ayes' shock?
Hale's speechless, he jailed a hero. Jacqueline's calm fury pins him.
The room is silent, power shifting to Walter.
Reporters scramble, clerks watch. Hale stammers, "Are these in the record?" "They will be," Jacqueline says. "Notarized, filed today." Hale's lost, "I wasn't aware, you didn't treat him like a human."
Jacqueline Cutin.
"He sat on his house's steps, where he raised me, where my mother died. You called him trash." Can you feel her righteous anger? Walter's silent, he knew this was coming. Hale, rattled, apologizes, an oversight.
Walter S. steady, yes.
Jacqueline moves, vacate his sentence, clear his record. Granted.
I stumble.
Release him.
The bailiff steps back.
Headlines form, hero jailed by mistake.
Walter steps forward, you erased my story.
That stings. But truth waits. Jacqueline stands with him, a daughter finishing what shouldn't have started. Justice isn't denied, it's claimed. Can you feel their triumph? The gallery in the Savannah County Courthouse let out a hushed gasp, a ripple of shock cutting through the heavy air. Someone even dared to murmur, "That's enough," under their breath, their voice trembling with disbelief. But Walter Harris? Oh, he didn't even blink. His eyes, steady as stone, locked onto the bench before him, radiating a quiet strength. He had nothing to prove, not to this judge, not in this room, not to anyone. Can you imagine the weight of that resolve?
You know what I think you really want.
Judge Gregory Hale sneered, his voice sharpening like a blade honed for battle.
You want us to feel sorry for you.
You want us to think there's something noble about ignoring the law. But let me tell you, there's nothing noble about breaking into a condemned house. It's just sad, pathetic even. Walter looked up, his gaze unwavering, calm as a still lake. I didn't break in, he said, his voice soft but firm, cutting through the judge's venom. Hale smirked, leaning back with a mocking glint in his eye. Right. You just strolled in like it still belonged to you, huh? Walter nodded, unshaken, his dignity a fortress. Yes. That's exactly what I did. Can you believe the power in that simple truth? The judge rolled his eyes, his patience wearing thin. Do you have any legal representation? He snapped.
Walter shook his head, steady à ever.
No, sir. Did you even try to hire one? I don't have the money, Walter replied, his tone honest, unapologetic. Of course not, Hale muttered under his breath, dripping with disdain. Can you feel the sting of that dismissal? The young prosecutor cleared her throat, her voice tentative but clear. Your Honor, she began, given Mr. Harris's age and the nonviolent nature of the offense, the state recommends a fine or supervised community service. Judge Hale turned to her, his eyebrow arching as if she'd just suggested freeing a hardened criminal. You think that's justice? He barked, his tone laced with incredulity. It's consistent with the code, she replied carefully, her composure holding despite the judge's glare. There's no evidence of threat or harm. Can you imagine the courage it took to stand up to him?
Hayes Finger tapait the table. Tap, 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 arrête le rythme of frustration.
Then he fixed his piercing gaze back on Walter. You see, that's the problem, he declared, his voice rising. Everyone wants to go easy on you because you're old, because you've got that soft voice, because you know how to look harmless. His eyes narrowed, glinting with contempt. But men like you? You don't learn from slaps on the wrist. And then, without a moment's hesitation, without a flicker of mercy, he dropped the bombshell. I'm sentencing you to 30 days in county jail. Can you even fathom the shock that tore through the room?
The word crashed like thunder, reverberating off the courthouse walls.
Someone gasped aloud, a sharp intake of breath. The prosecutor's eyes widened in disbelief, her composure cracking. Even the bailiff flinched, caught off guard by the harshness. But Walter Harris? He didn't move, didn't blink, didn't tremble, not for a second. He stood there, rooted like an ancient oak, because he knew this day was coming. Oh, but he knew something else too, this wasn't the end. Not by a long shot.
Can you feel the storm brewing beneath his calm exterior?
There's a world of difference between silence and surrender, isn't there? Walter Harris stood alone at the defense table, no lawyer by his side, no family in sight, no papers to wave, no arguments to hurl. Just a quiet, unshakable presence. A man whose entire life was being reduced to a single case number and the fiery temper of a judge. Judge Gregory Hale stared down at him, his face set like he'd already made peace with the sentence. He wasn't searching for truth, oh no. He was performing, delivering a message not just to Walter, but to every soul watching. This courtroom was his stage, and Walter?
Just another act inappelé des runs à tous en times.
Can you believe the audacity of that man? You're not saying much, Mr. Harris, Hale taunted, leaning back in his chair with a smug grin.
Got nothing to say for yourself.
Walter's voice came low, steady, like a river carving through stone. What would I say that would matter to you?
Oh, that landed like a punch. The gallery shifted, a rustle of unis spreading.
That wasn't anger, sarcasm, or defiance. It was a fact, cold and bare, slicing through the judge's bravado. Can you feel the weight of those words? Hale's lips curled into a smirk, his eyes gleaming with condescension. So you want to play the quiet martyr, is that it?
Walter blinked slowly, his calm unshaken.
No, sir. I'm just tired of speaking where no one listens. The judge laughed, not a warm chuckle, but a smug, self-satisfied bark that echoed off the walls. Everyone wants to be a philosopher when they're caught, he scoffed. But I deal in facts, not feelings.
Can you believe the arrogance dripping from every word?
Walter stayed silent, but that silence? It wasn't empty, not by a long shot. It was heavy with decades of unspoken insults, doors slammed in his face, quiet sacrifices made in the shadows, and all the times he'd been told to stay in his place. He wasn't quiet because he didn't care. Oh no, he was silent because he had nothing to prove to them. The prosecutor sat stiffly, her polished demeanor faltering. Even she, young and composed, could sense it. Something about this case didn't sit right. But she stayed silent, because in this room, procedure trumped perception, didn't it?
Can you feel the tension tightening like a quiet spring?
Judge Hale adjusted his robe, leaning in with a preacher's fervor. You know what the real problem is, he asked, his voice booming to the whole room. People like Mr. Harris think the rules don't apply to them. They think if they stay calm long enough, we'll forget what they did. He jabbed a finger like he was delivering a sermon from on high. This man broke the law. Plain and simple. I don't care what porch he sat on, what memories he wants to relive. That house is city property, condemned, off limits, end of story. Can you feel the finality he tried to slam down? But Walter stood still, eyes forward, chin up, unshaken. He didn't nod, didn't flinch, didn't crack, because he wasn't broken. He was measured, watching, waiting. Hale squinted, his voice dripping with disdain. You ever wonder why people don't take responsibility anymore? It's always someone else's fault, some sob story meant to tug at our sympathy. Can you believe he had the nerve to say that? Walter tilted his head, not in defiance but in quiet curiosity, his voice steady as ever. Have you ever wondered, he replied, why some people only hear emotion when they should be listening to history? Oh, that hit like a stone dropped in still water. The judge's face hardened, his jaw tightening just enough to show Walter's words had struck a nerve he didn't want touched. I don't care about your history, Mr. Harris, he snapped, his voice clipped and cold. That's not what's on trial here. Can you feel the walls closing in? No, Walter said quietly, his words soft but piercing, it never is. And there it was, the truth laid bare. This wasn't about property or trespassing. Everyone in that room knew it, deep down. Walter Harris wasn't on trial for a crime. He was on trial for daring to exist with dignity in a world that kept trying to strip it away. And still, he didn't break. Isn't that the kind of strength that takes your breath away? Hale leaned forward, his voice colder now, like ice. You've been through this before, he said, his tone heavy with accusation. You think we don't check records? 6 months ago, you were cited at another location. Same behavior, private property, unauthorized presence. And here you are again. You seem to have a habit of showing up where you don't belong. The pause was loaded, the implication sharp as a blade. Can you feel the weight of that judgment? Walter raised his eyes, his voice clear, not loud but resonant. I've spent my whole life being told I don't belong, he said, in schools, in neighborhoods, in offices I helped build. And now in this courtroom. Oh, that cut deep. The judge shook his head, unmoved, his voice hard. You don't get a pass because the world hasn't been kind. That's not how this works. Can you believe he dismissed a lifetime of struggle so easily? Walter nodded slowly, his calm unshaken. I know exactly how it works, he said. That's why I'm not surprised. The room shifted, you could feel it. Some who'd chuckled earlier fell silent, their smirks fading. Others who'd whispered stopped, caught by the weight of his words. Even the bailiff glanced at Walter, a flicker of respect in his eyes. Can you sense the tide turning, even just a little? Hale cleared his throat, pushing back against the unease creeping under his skin. You ever get tired of playing the victim, Mr. Harris? That one hit the room like a slap. Walter didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice, but his silence? It roared louder than any shout could. A few in the gallery exchanged uneasy looks, their confidence wavering. The prosecutor shifted in her chair, discomfort breaking through her polished facade. Hale sighed, annoyed that his jab hadn't broken Walter. Can you feel the judge's frustration mounting? Let the record show, Hale said, his voice sharp as a whip, that the defendant offers no legal defense, no motion to dismiss, no request for counsel. He glared at Walter, his eyes burning. You're not even going to try. Walter met his gaze, calm, steady, fully present. I did try, he said, his voice low but resolute. All my life. This isn't the first courtroom I've been in, and it won't be the first one that gets it wrong. Oh, that landed like a thunderbolt, deeper than any outburst could. Can you feel the raw power in those words? Judge Hale opened his mouth, but the words caught for a split second, not long enough to admit doubt, but just enough to feel it, a crack in his armor. Walter stood still, ready to be judged, but what no one saw, not the judge, not the prosecutor, not the crowd, was that judgment cuts both ways. Walter Harris had been judging this system his entire life, and now he was saying it out loud. Can you imagine the courage it took to stand there and speak that truth? The air grew thick, heavy with anticipation, like a fuse burning down to its end. No one moved, no one breathed too loudly. It was the kind of stillness that comes not from peace but from something big about to break. Everyone felt it, even if they couldn't name it. Walter Harris, 78 years old, stood alone at the defense table, unmoved, his presence louder than any protest. Can you feel the electricity in that moment? But Judge Gregory Hale? He wasn't here for truth or fairness, oh no. He wanted compliance, apology, submission, and Walter wasn't giving him any of it. That's what made this moment so dangerous, so charged with possibility. The prosecutor cleared her throat again, standing with caution, sensing the pressure. Your Honor, she said, her voice careful but firm, the state has reviewed Mr. Harris's case. Given his age, his clean record, and the non-violent nature of the incident, we recommend community service or a fine. A short probation period could also. Can you believe she tried again, despite the judge's wrath? No. The words sliced through the room like a guillotine. Hale didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His tone was sharp, final, unyielding. The prosecutor froze, caught off guard. Your Honor, I said no. Hale snapped, raising a hand to silence her. Let me be clear, men like Mr. Harris don't learn anything from picking up litter or paying a small fine. Men like him, he spat the words without shame, every syllable heavy with assumption and judgment. Can you feel the venom in that phrase? Walter didn't blink. He'd heard worse in better places, hadn't he? Hale leaned forward, elbows on the bench, his eyes locking onto Walter like a predator sizing up prey that refused to run. I've seen your kind before, he said, his voice low and menacing. You stroll in here with your quiet words and your long stares, thinking you're above it all. You think if you stand tall and talk slow, we'll forget you broke the law. Can you believe the audacity, the way he tried to tear Walter down? Walter didn't respond, didn't lower his gaze. He knew exactly what this was. Not justice, not trespassing, but a man in a robe desperate to prove his authority, to make even dignity bow in his courtroom. Can you feel the clash of wills? I don't care how many years you've lived, Mr. Harris. Hale continued, his voice rising with fury. You walked onto that property knowing you weren't supposed to be there. You defied the warning, ignored the law, and you want me to reward that with leniency. Can you hear the outrage in his voice, as if Walter's quiet strength was a personal affront? Still, silence from Walter, but the room wasn't quiet anymore. People shifted, whispered, some who'd scoffed earlier now looking uneasy, like they were witnessing something unravel. Was this still just a trial, or was it something deeper, something raw and human? Can you sense the shift in the air, the moment when the script starts to crack? The young prosecutor, her voice trembling ever so slightly, tried once more to steer the course of justice. Your Honor, if I may, she said cautiously, there's precedent in similar cases that supports alternative sentencing, especially with, but Judge Gregory Hale cut her off like a blade slicing through silk. I'm aware of precedent, he snapped, his voice rising with a fiery edge that filled the Savannah County Courthouse. But this isn't about precedent. This is about making sure people understand there are consequences for ignoring the law. His eyes, sharp as daggers, locked onto Walter Harris, gleaming with a mix of triumph and disdain. 30 days. Can you believe the audacity of that moment? The words shot out like a bullet, piercing the heavy air. "Excuse me," the prosecutor gasped, her eyes wide with shock, her composure crumbling under the weight of the judge's decree. "I'm sentencing Mr. Harris to 30 days in county jail." Hale declared again, louder now, his voice booming for the record, effective immediately. It was as if the floor vanished beneath the courtroom. The court clerk's fingers froze above her keyboard, hovering in disbelief. The bailiff shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to Walter. Gasps echoed through the gallery, and someone whispered, "Did he just say jail?" A reporter scribbled furiously, sensing a story that would shake the county. Can you feel the shock rippling through the room? And Walter Harris? Oh, he just stood there, calm as a still lake under a stormy sky, like he'd known this was coming all along. At 78, his presence was a monument of dignity, unshaken by the judge's thunder. Judge Hale leaned back, arms crossed, a flicker of satisfaction crossing his face, like a man who'd just won a battle. But wait, something was off, wasn't it? He expected tears, pleading, maybe a desperate outburst. But Walter? He just nodded once, as if he'd been waiting for this moment all morning. That quiet strength unnerved Hale more than he'd ever admit. Can you imagine the judge's unease, faced with such unshakable resolve? "Do you understand your sentence, Mr. Harris?" Hale asked, his tone tinged with irritation at Walter's lack of reaction. "Yes, Your Honor," Walter replied, his voice simple, steady, unshaken. "I understand. Anything to say before I close the matter?" Walter looked straight at him, eyes clear and unflinching. "No, sir." The judge hesitated, just for a breath, caught off guard by the calm. "This court is adjourned," he barked, slamming the gavel down with more force than needed, the sound echoing like a cold final knell. Can you hear that gavel's heavy thud? But something about Walter's composure didn't sit right, not with Hale, not with anyone. The prosecutor lowered her head, her hands clasped tightly, grappling with the injustice. The bailiff stepped forward, but Walter didn't budge. He stood like a statue, quiet, dignified, unbroken. 30 days in jail? That wouldn't break him. He'd faced worse, men who tried to erase him, systems that sought to bury his name, and here he was, still standing tall. Can you feel the strength radiating from this man? Judge Hale, watching from his lofty bench, adjusted his robe, a nervous tick betraying his unease. Why did his gut prickle with discomfort? Was it Walter's silence? The lack of victory in the room? Or the nagging sense that despite all his authority, he hadn't truly won? He glanced toward the door, reaching for the next case file, but deep down something whispered, this wasn't over. Not yet. Can you sense the storm brewing beneath the surface? Walter Harris had been quiet, too quiet. And sometimes, the calmest soul in the room is the one holding the fiercest storm, just waiting to unleash it. The gavel's echo lingered like distant thunder, but Hale was already moving on, stacking papers as if the last case hadn't just shaken the room to its core. Whispers of disbelief trailed through the gallery. No one expected jail for a 78-year-old man who'd done nothing but sit on a porch, lost in memories. Can you believe the outrage simmering in those murmurs? Walter hadn't moved an inch. He stood tall, spine straight despite his age, hands folded calmly, the verdict sliding off him like water off stone. No panic, no desperation, just an eerie, unshakable calm that seemed to defy the chaos around him. Can you picture that strength, that quiet power? The bailiff hesitated, not because he didn't know his duty, but because he didn't want to disturb such profound stillness. It wasn't defeat, it was deliberate, like Walter was letting something unfold, something big. Can you feel the anticipation building? Judge Hale glanced up, annoyed by the quiet that had settled over the room. This proceeding is over, he said flatly, as if repeating it could seal the matter shut. Take him into custody. And that's when Walter spoke, his voice calm, respectful, cutting through the tension like a gentle breeze. Before I go, he said, may I make a phone call? Not a plea, not a desperate grasp for freedom, just a man checking something off a list. Hale blinked, caught off guard. A phone call. He let out a dry, dismissive chuckle. What? Calling your lawyer now? Bit late for that, don't you think? Can you believe the mockery in his tone? Walter didn't react, his calm unshaken. Just one call, sir, he said simply. The judge rolled his eyes, waving a hand. Fine, 60 seconds. Bailiff, hand him your phone. The bailiff paused for a moment, then pulled a cell phone from his pocket and handed it over. Walter nodded his thanks, his movements deliberate, unhurried. He didn't glance around, didn't care who was watching. He took the phone, punched in a number from memory, no passcode, no contact list, just digits burned into his mind like a sacred vow. Can you imagine the weight of that moment? The courtroom fell silent, the murmurs fading into a hush. There was something about Walter, his calm, the way he waited for the line to connect, that made everyone pause, holding their breath. Ring, ring, click. Then, in a voice steady as granite, Walter spoke 4 words. It's time. Bring them. Oh, those words. No explanation, no hint of who them was, just a calm certainty that carried more power than a shout ever could. Can you feel the electricity in the air? He handed the phone back to the bailiff, nodded once, and turned to face the front of the courtroom, standing tall waiting. It wasn't defiance, it was patience, the kind born not from hope but from absolute certainty. Judge Hale watched, his smirk flickering into something else, annoyance, suspicion, maybe even a touch of unease, but he shook it off. What? Your grandkids coming to protest? He mocked, his fake smile dripping with condescension. Walter didn't answer. He didn't need to. That call wasn't for show, it was a signal, and it was already on its way. Can you sense the shift coming? Hale cleared his throat, eager to move on. All right, enough of the drama. Bailiff, take him. But even as he spoke, a ripple passed through the courtroom, subtle at first, then growing, like the calm before a storm. It wasn't noise, it was the absence of it, a sudden hush that fills a room when something monumental is about to happen. Even the most distracted spectators fell silent, feeling it deep in their bones. This story wasn't over. Can you feel the tension tightening? Walter turned his head slightly, just enough to catch the judge's eyes. No anger, no fear, just quiet, unshakable knowledge. And for the first time that morning, Judge Hale didn't look like the one in control. Somewhere inside, he knew this wasn't the end. Not just a porch, not just an old man, not just a charge on paper. This was the start of something bigger. Can you sense the tide turning? And though no one in that room knew it yet, those 4 words, it's time. Bring them, were about to change everything. Walter Harris didn't need a courtroom to defend him. He had something far stronger, the truth. And someone was on their way to deliver it with unstoppable force. Can you imagine what's coming next? It began with a sound, not the clink of chains, not the echo of the gavel, but the sharp, deliberate click of high heels striking the marble floor outside the courtroom doors. Click, click, click. Then, with a burst that shook the room, the heavy double doors swung wide open. The courtroom froze, every head turned, every breath held. Even Judge Hale, who moments ago was reaching for the next file, looked up, startled by the sheer force of the entrance. Can you picture that dramatic moment? And there she was, tall, poised, radiating unapologetic confidence. She didn't just enter the courtroom, she commanded it. Her sleek black suit hugged her frame with sharp, clean lines, a testament to power and precision. Her heels struck the floor like a metronome, keeping time in a room where time itself seemed to stop. Her name? Jacqueline Harris, Walter's daughter. But she wasn't just a daughter, oh no. She was a congresswoman, a decorated attorney, a leader whose voice thundered in Washington, and now in the heart of Savannah County Court. Can you feel the power she brought with her? She didn't glance left or right, didn't acknowledge the whispers erupting in the gallery, didn't even look at the judge's stunned face. She wasn't here for pleasantries, she was here for justice. And she came with backup. 3 men followed, each in tailored suits, carrying leather briefcases embossed with gold lettering, Warren and Grant LLP, one of the most feared law firms in the Southeast. The courtroom practically trembled under their presence. Even the seasoned attorneys in the gallery sat up straighter, eyes wide, recognizing the storm that had just swept in. Can you sense the shift in the room's energy? Judge Hale's jaw tightened, his face flushing as he tried to regain control. This proceeding has been adjourned, he barked, louder than necessary, his voice cracking with irritation. If you don't have business with the court, but Jacqueline didn't flinch, didn't pause, didn't even blink. She strode straight to the defense table where her father stood, unwavering. Walter didn't turn. He didn't need to. He'd been waiting for her. She placed a single hand on his shoulder, a touch that spoke volumes. Not just support but solidarity, power, unbreakable unity. Can you feel the strength in that gesture? Then she turned to face Judge Hale head-on, her expression unreadable, but her eyes? Razor-sharp, cutting through the tension like a blade. Your Honor, she began, her voice clear, firm, without a trace of hesitation. Before my father is taken into custody, there are some documents I believe you need to review. Can you hear the authority in her voice, the calm before the storm? Hale sat back, visibly irritated, his fingers gripping the bench. This case has already been ruled upon, he said, struggling to keep his tone steady. If you wish to challenge my ruling, file an appeal like everyone else. But Jacqueline didn't argue, didn't plead, she didn't need to. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a folder, thick bound, stamped with official seals, and walked it to the bench. She didn't slam it down, but she didn't place it gently either. She set it with precision, with confidence, with a control that demanded attention. Open it, she said, not a suggestion, not a threat, but a fact, undeniable and final. Can you imagine the weight of that moment, the entire room holding its breath? The courtroom in Savannah County held its breath, the air thick with anticipation. Judge Gregory Hale, perched high on his bench, hesitated, his pride warring with a flicker of curiosity. Then, with a sharp flick of annoyance, he snatched up the folder Jacqueline Harris had placed before him and flipped it open. And just like that, his face changed.
Can you imagine the shock?
At first, his brow furrowed, his eyes narrowed like he was trying to deny what he saw. Then his grip on the pages tightened, his knuckles whitening, and his posture sank deeper into the chair, as if the weight of the truth was pulling him down. What he was reading wasn't just a stack of papers. It was a mirror, reflecting back the grave mistake he'd made, showing him exactly who he'd dared to sentence. Can you feel the seismic shift in that moment?
Walter Harry 60 juste some Holman Watring ont a condamné de l'eau, au no.
He was a former military architect, a decorated veteran whose ingenuity had reshaped city infrastructures, a man who'd advised federal agencies on post-disaster recovery. And that house he was arrested for trespassing on? It wasn't city property, not like Hale had smugly claimed. It was caught in a messy clerical dispute over redevelopment zones, land Walter still legally owned, passed down through his late wife's trust. The property had never been fully transferred, never even legally condemned. And now that undeniable truth sat before the judge in crisp court filings, signed deeds, and notarized affidavits, staring him down like a judgment of its own. Can you believe the audacity of his earlier assumptions? Judge Hale's mouth opened slightly, but no sound escaped. Can you picture his stunned silence? He read the same paragraph 3 times, his eyes darting over the words, desperately hoping they'd morph into something else. They didn't. He'd sentenced a man to jail, not just without cause, but in violation of that man's legal rights. And that man? The father of a U.S. Congresswoman, Jacqueline Harris, who now stood before him, her calm fury like a storm waiting to break. Can you feel the weight of her gaze, pinning him to his seat? The courtroom was deathly silent, not from boredom or indifference, but because something monumental had shifted. Power control. The entire balance of the room had tilted from the judge's bench to the defense table, where Walter and Jacqueline stood unyielding. Reporters in the back were already grabbing their phones, fingers flying over screens to capture the moment. Clerks watched, wide-eyed, unsure what would happen next. Can you sense the electricity crackling in the air? And Judge Hale? For the first time since he donned his black robe that morning, he looked afraid, not of Walter, not even of Jacqueline, but of the truth he'd refused to see and could no longer dodge. He glanced at Walter, who met his gaze with calm, knowing eyes, no anger, no gloating, just a quiet recognition that spoke volumes. The man Hale had tried to reduce to nothing now stood taller than the entire court. And behind him Jacqueline, not here to beg for mercy but to dismantle a mistake, and she was just getting started. Can you imagine the power radiating from them? Judge Gregory Hale clutched the folder like it was a live wire, his hands trembling ever so slightly. The courtroom remained silent, not because anyone demanded it, but because no one dared breathe. What they just witnessed wasn't a dramatic objection or a clever legal trick, it was something far more profound. It was truth, cold and unyielding, unfolding in real time right before their eyes. Can you feel the weight of that revelation? Jacqueline Harris hadn't come to this courtroom to grovel or play political games. Oh no. She came armed with facts, documents, undeniable evidence. And with every line the judge read, his confidence drained away, leaking from his face like water through a cracked dam. He tried to stay composed to hide the panic creeping in, but everyone could see it. His jaw clenched tighter, his fingers gripped the pages harder, his lips pressed into a thin line that couldn't contain the weight of what he now knew. Can you picture his struggle to maintain that facade? The courtroom, so still just moments ago, was waking up. Reporters in the back were texting furiously, their phones buzzing with the promise of headlines. One clerk bit her lip, her eyes darting to the folder. Even the prosecutor, who'd been firm and professional all morning, leaned forward slightly, desperate to glimpse the truth that had undone the judge.
Can you feel the room coming alive with the shock of it all?
It was all there, laid bare in black and white. Walter Harris, branded a trespasser, a repeat offender, a burden on the system, was none of those things. He was a former U.S. military architect, his designs critical in post-disaster relief zones, a man honored with multiple commendations. His record wasn't just clean, it was honorable, a testament to a life of service. And that house he'd been accused of squatting in? It was his, still is legally. Yes, it had been flagged for redevelopment, tangled in zoning disputes, but those disputes were unresolved, pending in bureaucratic limbo. The ownership had never legally transferred. The title deed, right there in Hale's trembling hands, bore Walter Harris's name in bold, undeniable ink. Can you believe the injustice he'd faced? Hale's eyes raced over the pages, not reading now but scanning, as if speed could erase what he'd seen. But it was too late, the truth was out. The man he'd sentenced, humiliated and belittled before a packed courtroom wasn't just innocent. He'd been wronged publicly, legally, and now visibly, in a way no one could ignore.
Can you imagine the shame creeping into the judge's hat?
Jacqueline stood by her father's side, composed as ever, her presence a silent force. She didn't need to speak, the documents roared louder than any voice could. Yet Hale tried to muster words, his voice faltering. "Mr. Harris," he stammered, clearing his throat, "these documents, have they been entered into the official record?" Can you hear the desperation in his voice, grasping for a lifeline? "They will be," Jacqueline replied, her tone firm, unshakable. "By this afternoon, every page has been notarized and reviewed by my legal team. Certified copies will be with the clerk's office by the end of the hour." Hale nodded stiffly, his eyes flicking between her, the folder, and Walter, searching for an escape. He wanted to object, to find anything to explain this away, but the truth? It didn't need explaining, it just sat there, heavy, permanent, undeniable. Can you feel the judge's world crumbling? For the first time in his judicial career, Judge Gregory Hale was a man without a plan, his authority slipping through his fingers like sand. His voice dropped, almost unsure. I wasn't made aware of this information during the initial case review," he mumbled, the words sounding hollow. Jacqueline stepped forward, not with anger but with a precise, cutting calm. "With all due respect, Your Honor," she said, her voice steady as steel, "it was never the court's job to know who my father was. It was the court's job to treat him like a human being, and it failed." Can you believe the power in that rebuke? Gasps rippled through the room, a collective intake of breath. Someone in the gallery muttered, "Wow!" under their breath, stunned by her boldness. But Jacqueline wasn't done, not by a long shot. "My father wasn't asking for a favor," she continued, her words slicing through the silence. "He wasn't begging for sympathy. He was asking to sit on the steps of the house he bought with his bare hands, the house where he raised me, the house where my mother drew her last breath. And you." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle like a stone. "You treated him like trash."
Like a criminal.
Can you feel the righteous fury in her voice, tempered by unshakable control? Walter still hadn't moved, standing with the same quiet patience he'd carried all morning. But now the room saw it differently, now they understood. He wasn't silent because he was weak, oh no. He was silent because he knew this moment was coming, didn't he? One phone call had set this in motion, delivering justice, not through vengeance, but through the raw, unyielding power of truth. Can you imagine the strength it took to wait for this? Judge Hale leaned back, visibly rattled, his hands fumbling as he removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. That commanding voice of his?
Gone, replaced by something soft, uneasy, almost broken.
The clerk leaned in, whispering something, and he nodded slowly, his face pale. He looked back at Walter, his eyes searching for something, anything, to salvage his dignity. I'd like to apologize, he said, his voice low, barely audible. Mr. Harris, it appears there's been a significant oversight. Can you hear the tremor in his words, the cracks in his armor?
Walter resedissais, stidi, unflinching.
He didn't smile, didn't gloat, just looked at the man who judged him without knowing him and replied softly, yes, there has. Oh, that simple acknowledgement carried the weight of a lifetime. The judge swallowed hard, his throat tight. Jacqueline stepped forward again, her voice resolute. Your Honor, I move to have my father's sentence vacated and his record cleared immediately. Can you feel the authority in her demand? Of course, Hale said, his words stumbling out, almost tripping over themselves. Yes, that motion is granted immediately. He turned to the bailiff, his voice urgent.
Relise, Monsieur Harris.
Immediately. The bailiff didn't hesitate, stepping back from Walter as if he'd been ordered to lower a weapon. The energy in the room shifted, like a collective exhale after holding breath for too long.
Can you sense the relief, the justice breaking through?
Reporters were typing furiously, their fingers ablur. Can you hear the headlines forming? Judge sentences war hero by mistake. Veteran saved by Congresswoman daughter. Injustice overturned in real time. Hale looked like he wanted to vanish, to melt into the bench, but there was no hiding, not in this room, not under these lights, not after the truth had been laid bare. Can you imagine his desperation to escape the spotlight? Walter took a deep breath, then stepped forward, just one step, and looked directly at the man who'd condemned him. You didn't just doubt my story, he said, his voice steady, resonant. You erased it. You took one look at me and decided what kind of man I must be. That's what stings. The room fell utterly silent, every ear hanging on his words. But the thing about truth, Your Honor, he continued, it doesn't go away when you ignore it. It waits. And that's what Walter had done, hadn't he? He waited patiently, and now the truth had arrived, undeniable and backed by power. Can you feel the triumph in his quiet resolve? Jacqueline stood beside her father, no longer just a congresswoman or attorney, but a daughter who'd stood in the gap, who'd come not to fight but to finish what never should have started. Together they stood, not as victims, but as living reminders that justice delayed isn't always justice denied. Sometimes, it just takes one voice, one phone call, and 4 simple words to turn the tide. Can you see their strength, unyielding and united? Judge Gregory Hale sat frozen, his fingers clutching the folder like it might dissolve if he let go. But nothing could stop what was happening. The walls of certainty he'd built, brick by brick, ruling by ruling, were trembling, and the entire courtroom could see it. He hadn't just made a clerical error or missed a form, he'd looked an innocent, dignified man in the eye and dismissed his entire existence. Can you believe the gravity of that mistake? And now that man stood before him, vindicated, still composed, still silent, stronger than anyone could have imagined. Those papers weren't just documents, they were a mirror, and for the first time in years, Hale didn't like what he saw staring back. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was suffocating, pressing down on everyone. The gallery, the clerks, the reporters, even the bailiff. No one dared speak, move, or break the fragile stillness enveloping the bench. This wasn't just a courtroom anymore, it was a reckoning, a moment where truth demanded to be heard. Can you feel the weight of that justice, finally breaking free? The prosecutor sat frozen, her eyes glued to her desk, her hands clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles turned white. She'd followed every rule, crossed every T, dotted every I, she'd done everything by the book. But deep down she knew, and everyone in that Savannah County courthouse knew, this case was never about legality. Oh no, it was about perception, about what Walter Harris looked like, not who he truly was. Can you imagine the weight of that realization? Judge Gregory Hale had judged Walter before the man even uttered a word, handing down a sentence not on evidence but on assumptions, prejudice, and a shocking lack of curiosity. How could he be so blind? Hale had assumed Walter was just another tired story, another burden to society, a statistic to be shuffled off to jail. But oh, how wrong he was. Walter wasn't a burden, he was a pillar, a decorated veteran, a homeowner, a father. And now the entire courtroom knew it, the truth ringing out like a clarion call. Hale tried to pull himself together, adjusting his robe with a trembling hand, running his fingers over his mouth as if to wipe away the shame. He was scrambling for any scraps of dignity left, but his slumped posture betrayed him. He wasn't in control anymore, not today, not in this room. Can you feel the power slipping from his grasp? Mr. Harris, he finally managed, his voice low, uneven, cracking under the weight of his mistake. I deeply regret how this matter was handled. Walter tilted his head slightly, not smug, not angry, just watchful, waiting, his eyes steady like a lighthouse in a storm. I wasn't aware of your record, your service, your ownership of the property. Had I known, can you believe he dared to make excuses? But you didn't want to know. Jacqueline Harris interrupted, her voice slicing through his words like a scalpel through fabric. She wasn't shouting, she didn't need to. Her calm, precise tone cut deeper than any yell could. You didn't ask. You didn't pause. You didn't think. You judged him the moment he walked through that door. You didn't see a veteran, a father, a man, you saw a problem. She took a step forward, her presence commanding the room. Can you feel the raw power in her words, exposing the judge's failure? The room held its breath, every soul frozen in place. Judge Hale opened his mouth, then closed it again, silenced because every excuse would only prove her right. Walter's silence had been a force all morning, but now Jacqueline's words filled the space with something else, accountability, unfiltered and undeniable. Can you imagine the weight of that moment, the truth laying bare the judge's prejudice? Hale turned to the bailiff, his voice strained. Please make sure Mr. Harris is fully cleared from the system, effective immediately. Yes, Your Honor, the bailiff replied, his tone clipped, professional. Then Hale looked back at Walter, desperation flickering in his eyes. If there's anything I can do to rectify, can you hear the plea in his voice, grasping for redemption? There is, Walter said, breaking his silence at last, his voice steady, resonant, like a bell tolling truth. Hale leaned forward, almost hopeful, clinging to a chance to salvage his honor. Start listening, Walter said. Start seeing. And that was it, no fiery speech, no rage, no call for vengeance. Just a simple, profound command. Start listening, start seeing. Because that's where it all went wrong. Not in a broken law or a missed file, but in the blindness of a man who'd stopped looking beyond the surface. Can you feel the wisdom in those words, cutting to the core of the injustice? Judge Hale sank back in his chair, staring at the bench as if it had betrayed him, as if it no longer belonged to him. For the first time in his career, the power he'd wielded so effortlessly felt like a crushing burden, one he'd used to harm a man who never deserved it. Can you imagine the shame weighing on him? And outside the courtroom, the storm was already raging. Reporters were filing stories, phones buzzing with notifications, social media exploding with hashtags, hashtag Walter Harris, hashtag Justice Misjudged, hashtag Truth in the Courtroom. Can you hear the world waking up to this story? But inside that room, nothing moved. The real shift had already happened. The balance of power had tipped, and everyone felt it, like a seismic quake reshaping the ground beneath them. The judge who thought himself untouchable had been unmasked, not by force, not by fury, but by a man who said almost nothing and a daughter who spoke only when it mattered most.
Can you sense the justice breaking through?
Jacqueline turned to her father, her hand reaching for his, not for show, not for sympathy, but for a deep, grounding connection. It was the first time that day Walter let his shoulders relax, just a fraction, because now it was done. His name was cleared, his story heard, but most importantly his dignity, oh that unshakable dignity, was restored. Can you feel the relief, the triumph in that moment? And Judge Hale? He wasn't just left with an overturned case, he was left with something far worse, the gut-wrenching realization that he'd become what he'd sworn to fight against. A man who handed out judgment without understanding, who let prejudice outweigh the law. He looked around the courtroom but no one met his eyes. Not the clerks, not the attorneys, not the crowd, and certainly not Walter. Why? Because they were all looking at something else, something greater. Can you see it too? They were gazing at a man who'd walked into the courtroom alone and walked out a symbol. Walter Harris, quietly carrying the weight of history on his back, had stood straighter than the system that tried to knock him down. He didn't need revenge, didn't need rage, he just needed the truth. And oh, how the truth had arrived in a sleek black suit, with a folder of undeniable facts and a voice that didn't flinch. Can you feel the power of that victory? In that moment, no one remembered the sentence. They remembered the silence, the stillness, the way a quiet man stood before power and didn't budge, because he didn't have to. The truth was always on his side, and it had finally caught up with the system that tried to bury it. Can you believe how long it took for justice to prevail? For a long moment, no one moved, no one spoke. The courtroom, once alive with whispers and judgment, now sat frozen in a stunned, reverent silence. The kind that doesn't just follow a revelation but honors it, demands stillness, holds its breath in awe. Walter Harris, 78 years old, stood at the heart of it all, not in handcuffs, not escorted, not broken. Oh no, he stood taller now, not because the courtroom had made room for him, but because he'd claimed that space on his own terms in his own time. Can you picture the strength radiating from him? Across from him, Judge Gregory Hale sat, still gripping the remnants of control with white-knuckled fingers. But it wasn't a gavel in his hand anymore, it was the crushing weight of his own assumptions, pressing hard against a truth he could no longer ignore. He stared down at the bench, searching for some shred of authority left beneath his robe and tarnished reputation, but the air had changed. He felt it, and so did everyone else. Can you sense the shift in the room's energy? Then Walter stepped forward, just one step, slow, deliberate, each movement carrying the burden of years and the courage of knowing those years meant something. He raised his eyes, not with defiance, but with a clarity that cut through the tension like a beacon. He met the judge's stare, their gazes locking, one man on a bench, the other finally free from its shadow. And then Walter spoke, his voice low but firm, unwavering, landing with the weight of 1,000 injustices that had never made the front page. "Tell me, Your Honor," he said, "do you still think I was trespassing?" Oh, that question. It didn't need an answer, it was a mirror, and Hale was forced to face it. Can you feel the power in that moment? Around the room, the impact was palpable. Heads turned, shoulders shifted, eyes widened in awe. It had taken all morning, pages of paperwork, a daughter's unyielding strength, and the quiet fortitude of a man who refused to break for this courtroom to see what it had become. Not a hall of justice, but a theater of assumption. Walter stood there, not begging for respect but commanding it, not by shouting, not by demanding, but by simply being. He'd walked in written off as a case number, a vagrant, a man out of place, but now? His place was center stage, and those who dismissed him couldn't look away. Can you see him standing tall, unshakable? The judge tried to speak, but words failed him, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He adjusted his robe again, a nervous reflex that offered no comfort, because power, when shaken, reveals who's truly in control. And in that moment, Walter Harris held the room, not with a title, not with the law, but with the truth he carried and the strength to stand on it. Can you imagine the judge's panic, his authority crumbling? The stillness held for another heartbeat. Then Walter continued, his voice slow, careful, laced with the grace of someone who knew exactly what this moment meant. "My father built that house with his hands," he said, each word heavy with memory. "My mother died in it. My name was written on the frame in pencil before I even knew how to read. I don't need a deed to prove I belong there. The land remembers." Oh, those words. They weren't just about ownership. They spoke to legacy, to history, to every soul who's been told they have no right to what they built. Can you hear the echoes of countless unheard voices in his speech? Walter turned slightly, just enough to face the courtroom, not just the judge, but everyone watching, everyone listening, everyone who'd ever been misjudged or pushed aside. "I've been told my whole life to move along," he said, "to step aside, to make room. I've heard it in the way people look at me, in the way I'm followed in stores, in the way I'm spoken to in rooms just like this one." He took a breath, steady and sure. "But I'm still here." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence filled every corner of the room, resonating with every heartbeat. Can you feel the power of his resolve? Behind him, Jacqueline stood silently, her eyes gleaming with pride. She didn't speak, didn't interrupt. She knew this was his moment, and he owned it, not with rage but with unshakable resolve. Walter turned back to the judge one last time, his voice steady, piercing. "You looked at me," he said, "and you didn't see a man. You saw a problem, a case to clear, a body to process. You never asked who I was, you just assumed I didn't matter." The judge swallowed hard because now he knew, Walter mattered, always had, and he'd been denied the benefit of the doubt until this very moment. Can you feel the sting of that truth? Walter stepped back, letting the truth shine where it belonged, in the open, in the light, where it couldn't be erased. A reporter slipped toward the exit, already crafting headlines, but Walter wasn't thinking about fame. He was thinking of every quiet moment that led to this, the mornings he passed that porch, the sound of his daughter's voice when he said, "It's time." He looked down, then returned to his seat, and the courtroom stayed silent, not out of pity, but out of profound respect. This wasn't just a defendant, this was a man who'd won, not by beating the system, but by refusing to let it steal his soul. Can you see the victory in his quiet strength? And as Judge Hale looked out across the courtroom, all he saw was the truth staring back, unyielding and eternal. Can you feel the weight of that reckoning, forever etched in the heart of Savannah County? The story of Walter Harris is a gut punch, a raw testament to resilience that leaves my heart both heavy and inspired. How can you not feel the weight of his quiet strength, standing tall against a system that tried to erase him? Walter's dignity, unyielding in the face of prejudice, is a beacon of hope. It's the kind of courage that makes you want to stand up and cheer. Jacqueline's fierce, unwavering defense of her father? It's a love so powerful it shakes the foundations of injustice. I'm moved to tears by their triumph, not just over a wrongful sentence, but over a world that too often judges by appearance rather than truth. Yet, I'm also enraged. How many Walters are out there, unseen, their stories buried by assumption? This isn't just a courtroom drama. It's a call to action, a reminder to listen, to see, to fight for those silenced. Walter's victory, won through patience and truth, fills me with awe, but it also stings, knowing justice shouldn't require such a battle. This story is a mirror, reflecting our flaws and our potential to do better. It's unforgettable, and it demands we carry its lesson forward.